to get us started, I'm going to go over a little bit about what we're talking about today. So you may have heard about World's Fairs. So these are expos or world expositions, previously known to a large extent as World's Fairs. These are global gatherings of nations that are regulated by, I don't know how to say this is in French, so give me a little bit of slack. Bureau International des Expositions, BIE, I think that was a good guess. I have some of my French speakers in the audience that are probably like, you could use a little work, but that's good. The BIE, which is based in Paris, and expos occur every 5 years in cities around the world. The first was held in 1851 in London. Like the Olympics, expos are the festivals of culture, technology, innovation, design, and human excellence. Past expos showcase the innovations of countries, including the mobile phone, the X-ray, and the ice cream cone. So you may have heard of this before. Did you know that they still are around? It's amazing. We actually just had one close, and Jim, one of our speakers here today, is going to get into that, I'm sure. But yeah, and in fact, we at Global Ties San Francisco were involved in the recruitment efforts for the youth ambassadors and cultural performers for Expo 2020 Dubai. It was our pleasure to do so. We made a lot of great connections doing that. And that's one of the fun things that I really wanted to mention is we were able to help recruit one of the cultural performers for Expo 2020 Dubai, which was Axis Dance Company. And that they are actually originally one of our professional resources for the work that we do with the United States Department of State International Visitor Leadership Program. So all these little connections that you make in the work that we do, it just keeps going full circle, and I love it so much. And I hope through this today, we make another connection for you all. With that, I am very excited to introduce who we have in the room here today. You have already received their full bios, so for the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of run through this really quickly. But we have Maggie Lemere, I hope that's your last name, who's an oral historian and who's going to get into this white paper that you may have heard about on the socio-cultural impact of expos. And then we also are joined by Jim Kaur, who is the director of the International Expositions Unit at the US Department of State. Very excited to have you both. In addition, we have my colleague, the International Program Coordinator at Global Ties San Francisco, Yongjian Si. Thank you so much. Yongjian here is going to be talking about his experience attending an expo in 2010. So I'll save that for him. We're also joined by Ethan Stanton, who is a colleague of Jim's, who will be here to jump in and assist with any questions as well towards the end. Great plan in store today. With that, I'm going to kick it off and pass it over to Maggie, and see you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alannah and Global Ties San Francisco for hosting this event with myself and our colleagues from the State Department's Expo Unit. It's really a privilege to be able to talk a little bit about expos or world fairs today. So Alannah is going to share some slides for me, and sort of my part of the presentation today will be about World's Fairs or global expos of the past, and some research that I did along with another oral historian to kind of try to understand what the impact of participating in one of these expos or World's Fairs was for the Americans who were present in them. You can go to the next slide, Alannah. So basically, our research was an oral history project. And for those of you who don't know, oral history, it's a type of in-depth, usually life story interview. So even though we have a topic such as the World's Fair, we really want to understand the full person and sort of how they came into that, why they came into it, and how it affected their life going forward. So we're not really interested in sort of the facts so much, but how it impacted a person and how they made meaning of an experience and moved forward with it in their life, kind of what it means to them or how it may have shaped them and decisions they made. And so we did sort of two sets of interviews. One was with people who had gone and participated in World's Fairs within the United States at four different ones: Seattle, New York, City, San Antonio, New Orleans. And the people who participated that we interviewed, this was my colleague Anna Kaplan who did these interviews, they were people who maybe went with their family or performed music or maybe worked there or helped do some planning. So it was a variety of different roles and experiences. And we did 30 interviews with people who'd participated in these four World's Fairs. And then on my side, I interviewed 16 former youth ambassadors who, or sometimes they're also called student ambassadors, who participated in slightly more recent World's Fairs in Shanghai, Yeosu, South Korea, Milan, Italy, and Astana, Kazakhstan. And so I got to talk to them about a very specific experience of working formally within the expo or the World's Fair in this specific role as a youth ambassador, which is sort of like a museum docent where you kind of help show people around and have a really good experience. And you really truly are being an ambassador for the United States, having conversations and answering questions and exchanging and sharing experiences. So our paper was really meant to sort of understand what it was like for people, what they remember, what stands out, what the best parts were, maybe what the challenges were, and what they think of this and the value to the United States. So we can go to the next slide. So I'll break this down a little bit for you all. And I'll share a little bit about the United States Expos, which my colleague Anna Kaplan looked at. So Anna looked at the Expo in Seattle in 1962, the Expo in New York, which was 1964 and 1965, the one in San Antonio, 1968, and New Orleans, 1984. And there were sort of two categories of impacts that Anna's research kind of unearthed. One was sort of the built physical environment impacts, and the other is these legacies of the felt impacts. So for the built impacts, we saw that expos really do have a pretty incredible impact on cities. Overall, they really increased investment in cities and sort of created an anchor that these are important cities for tourism within the United States. So you can see there's a picture of the Space Needle. And so in places like Seattle, the Space Needle came from the World's Fair, and it's an enduring symbol to this day of Seattle, although maybe some people don't know that this is from the World's Fair. For New York, Queens kind of became centered instead of Manhattan. And obviously Queens now plays an important role in kind of our imagination and how we think about diversity and languages and all these things in the United States. In New Orleans, there was a really great revitalization of tourism and the development of the Riverwalk. And in San Antonio, the Institute for Texan Cultures was built. So those were all just examples of really positive things that happened. But of course, there was also some challenges and less positive things. So in San Antonio, there was a neighborhood that was sort of moved and relocated to make the expo. And that was sort of under the guise of urban renewal at the time. So that is a more painful memory for a community there. But overall, there's these kind of lasting physical infrastructures and developments that happened in each city. On the other side, the sort of more felt impacts, and this kind of goes hand in hand with physical impacts, all of these cities kind of became introduced on a world stage. And there was a surge of pride for these cities as kind of a gateway to the world, often kind of, near a border or an ocean. They became kind of important access points to the United States and sort of captured more of the imagination. For the people who went to them, what we found was that sort of difference became less scary. So the expos were sort of a unique cultural space in that time, not only because you had people from all over the world coming together in these expos, but also people from across the same city coming together. So in Seattle, there were a lot of different musicians from different communities. A lot of Black musicians were really highlighted and profiled. People who were differently disabled folks were included. In San Antonio, different languages were really elevated. Spanish was something that was seen as to be like really prideful and important. So people within communities really got to meet each other, and it had a lasting impact on those communities and those experiences of exchange in a really positive way. And some people sort of changed their careers and the trajectories in their studies as a result. So we can go to the next slide. So the part of the research that I did, which was about the expos overseas that are more recent, focused on Shanghai in 2010, South Korea in 2012, Milan in 2015, and Astana in 2017. So the youth ambassadors, I mentioned a little bit about their role before, but these were all really energetic, enthusiastic young people who I found were just desperately excited for and looking for opportunities, not only to kind of study abroad, but actually live and work abroad. And so when they found out about World's Fairs, many of them hadn't heard of it before. They were like, wow, there's an opportunity where I can go work and speak the local language, have my housing and transportation covered, have a program, be affiliated with the State Department. So it was something that people didn't know about. When they found out about it, they enthusiastically applied, and they were just so excited to have this opportunity to represent the United States. For some people, they'd studied abroad in the country where the expo was. For other people, they may have had sort of ethnic, family, and cultural ties, or maybe they had visited once, or, in the case of South Korea, maybe they watched South Korean dramas and really became enamored with South Korean culture. So there were a variety of reasons, but all of the young people really, really wanted to just have a more depthful experience in the country that they served in. And what we saw was that for the people who met the youth ambassadors, so people from the host countries, the Italians and the South Koreans, etc., it really helped challenge stereotypes of what an American is. So, people will sometimes think of us in terms of stereotypes that are, quite outdated from Hollywood, etc., that we're a nation of all, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people who don't speak any languages other than English and don't travel. So by having a really diverse group of youth ambassadors who spoke often the host country language and many other languages, it really helped give a much broader view of what being an American is and looks like. And that also created these really powerful moments of connectivity and conversation. The youth ambassadors were sort of encouraged to have real dialogues about the issues that their expo represented. So in one case, in Italy, it was sort of around the future of food and sustainability, sharing experiences related to culinary culture and farming, climate change. Like, people could really delve into that and discuss it. In Astana, it was the future of energy, so talking about different kind of energy policies and politics. And so youth ambassadors were allowed to sort of share and encouraged to share their own opinions, but of course to do so diplomatically as ambassadors. And that was something that all of the ambassadors said they took away, was this kind of diplomatic skill set. For the youth ambassadors themselves, I think unexpectedly for a lot of them, it actually really deepened and solidified their identity as an American. So I think, you may want to leave the country because you're yearning to have all of these different experiences. I know that was true for me when I was younger, but also sometimes being away helps you realize how American you really are, especially with being a group of other young Americans and the values that you really appreciate about your society. All of these young Americans kind of realized the power of being a representative of the United States, and they started to think about their interactions as kind of being a constant ambassadorship, not only through their formal role, but anytime they travel, and sort of the power of those people-to-people exchanges. They realized it was possible to be patriotic, but not be nationalistic, that there's a way to talk about our values and our country and our history that can be nuanced and honest, and be really generative in how we exchange. For a lot of them, it sparked an interest in knowing more of US history and sort of connecting with different communities from their peers who are represented in sort of the immigrant communities. So if they were in China, they may become more interested in understanding the Chinese American experience and history. And I would say overall, what I found really impressive was the youth ambassadors were just such a pleasure to talk to, because they had these really great kind of worldviews where they saw a lot of nuance and gray and were just incredibly thoughtful about global issues. They didn't kind of see things in simplistic good and evil. They understand that people can be different than their governments and often are. And they were really, at the end of the day, invested kind of in building real people to people exchanges and relationships and careers with people in other countries where they centered the really great parts of being an American. And a lot of them to this day are still working in international education and the foreign service and fashion and tech. So this was an experience that sort of altered their lives and gave them a trajectory to sort of participate in a career that was international. We can go to the next slide. So I think, overall, all of the narrators, which is what we call our interviewees in oral history, really felt like the Global Expo was a deeply valuable experience, for them if they were working there, but also for the people that came. And that compared to other types of investments that the US government might make in the military or something like that, for example, that the amount of funding and resources and the impact, even if it's hard to quantitatively measure, was so important for a lot of the people who participated in these expos and came, especially to the ones where these ambassadors were abroad. They may have come from small villages. They may never meet another American or ever have the opportunity to travel to the US. And so, it felt and was meaningful for everyone involved. The other note that I heard a lot was they kind of want the US government to support this programming even more and to sort of engage in even like deeper stories around the US and our history and our aspirations in a really honest way, and that story can really be meaningful and instructive, especially in a society and a time where, we've all been not together because of COVID and we have so much misinformation. So, all in all, people felt like this type of people to people exchange is more important now than ever. Even though we have so much information available, there's nothing like an actual in person experience. So, that's a little bit of kind of the paper and what we found about the past and what people who participated in the past were looking for. And Alannah, if you'd like, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have or to take some at the end, depending on how we're doing with time.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, I love the comments you made about the people to people connections, because it's the same thing that we do in our work in the public diplomacy and international exchange. So it's you're speaking my language, is what I'm saying. It's great to hear your perspectives on that and these findings. I do have a couple of quick questions for you, and we'll turn to more towards the end. I want to know a little bit about what is an oral history in the first place. You're an oral historian, and these were interviews, and you got findings from it. But just really briefly, can you start with a little bit about defining what is that?
Yeah, so an oral history is a really long, in-depth interview. So we're kind of like the anti-soundbite culture of interviewing, and we're very different than journalistic interviews. So we don't have a list of questions, but we're really interested in being in a conversation that really creates a meaningful space for someone to reflect on their life experiences. And we look at the whole context, as I mentioned, about the person. So kind of understanding before the person went to an expo, had they ever traveled outside of the United States? They come from a rural farm in Minnesota, then how did that affect their experience? Or did they grow up in San Francisco and travel all the time? So understanding kind of the journey and how all the kind of threads tie together, and then how that impacted the person's kind of worldview and choices and decisions and values and beliefs. And so it's really, it kind of feels informal because hopefully someone just feels like they're talking to a friend. And as someone who was a young person at some point myself, studying abroad and moving abroad, I also really related to a lot of the people I was talking to, and we weren't that far apart in age. So it was pretty gratifying for me to hear about their journeys and their life experiences and how those experiences abroad have really affected their values and what they're doing in the world today and what their goals are. And whether or not people were in public service, it was really just gratifying to hear that everyone kind of shared these values towards service in their own way, and engagement. So it's an in-depth interview, and we try to just create the space for someone to do what we call meaning making about their life story.
That is great. I love that. You don't have any questions. You're just in it for the discussion and see where it goes. That's really great. Kind of like what we're doing here today, but not really. You make a good point too about diving into how it impacts their life trajectory. And coincidentally, that is a perfect tie-in to our next segment. I swear it wasn't planned. Going straight into passing it off to my colleague Yongjin, because I would love to hear about your experience, Yongjin, in having attended an expo yourself and how it impacted you. So I'll pass it off to you at this point. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much, Alannah. Thank you so much, Maggie. And good morning, everyone. My name is Yongjian Si, and I'm an international coordinator at Global Thai San Francisco. I'm a first-generation American of Chinese origins, and I'm really honored to be here to share my personal story as an attendee of the World Expo and how that experience has shaped my worldview. So to start, let me take you back to a moment 11 years ago when I was just a teenager. I had the unique opportunity to return to my country of origin to attend the World Expo 2010 of Shanghai. And, it's really interesting because as a teenager, I didn't really know what the expo quite was. It was something that everyone else was raving about. And one of my relatives bought us tickets. So I said, why not? Let's do it. And it was an incredible experience in so many different ways. Over the course of the 3 days I was there, I felt like I was, had traveled across the globe as I just went from pavilion to pavilion, just experiencing countries I've never dreamed of visiting, right? Serbia, Paraguay, Bolivia, I even went into the North Korean pavilion. And at that time, even though I haven't traveled much outside of the US, in my home country, China at that time, I really became fascinated by the world's diverse cultures, through all the countless exhibitions, art performances, etc. For me, it was more of like a Disneyland and miniature UN of cultural diplomacy and world affairs. And I loved how that experience allows ordinary citizens a glimpse into different parts of the world. And so after attending the World Expo, as I felt that that experience allowed me to, I started to think about the importance of cultural diplomacy and how I could incorporate that into my personal and professional life. The little things that we can do to connect cultures and to touch hearts. And looking back at all that experience, I'm so grateful because the first glimpse into, as an attendee, of the World Expo really gave me a first taste of what it means to be a global citizen. And over the next decade, that initial curiosity really blossomed into this passion. For example, I became an avid language learner, had the opportunity to live in Mexico, Costa Rica, and Kazakhstan through various international internships and fellowships. And I just want to say I'm incredibly thankful for the profound impact that the World Expo had on me. It led me to pursue all those valuable opportunities to expand my worldview. And as a teenager, I was someone who was more sheltered, haven't traveled to a lot of places. I was often afraid to try something new, but I'm so grateful that this experience gave me planted the seed for me to venture outside of my comfort zone, to learn and grow, and to connect gracefully, through cultural diplomacy. And here as International Program Coordinator at Global Thai San Francisco, I'm so excited to be part of a network to continue to build stronger communities based on mutual appreciation and a celebration of each other's life experiences. That's all. And I'd like to share a few pictures of my time as a teenager at the World Expo. So yes, this is me, my teenage self at the 2010 World Expo. This is, I think, the emblematic symbols, the Shanghai Expo, different pavilions, Tunisia, Mexico, Russia. This is inside one of the pavilions. I don't remember which one. Does anybody recognize the flag? Or Canada, North Korea, Iceland, USA pavilion. And interesting fact, I've also been to the site of the 2017 Astana pavilion when I was teaching Kazakhstan. So here you go. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to share my experience. It's really an honor. And with that, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Jim Core, Director of International Expositions Unit at the U.S. Department of State.
Hi, good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are. My name is Jim Core, Director of the International Expo Unit at the U.S. State Department. It's a real pleasure to be here, particularly with a group from San Francisco, a city that has been shaped in some ways by its own experience with World's Fairs. I think about the Marina District that was part of, that was developed because of the 1915 International Exposition that was held in the city. And hey, the stuff keeps on, these events keep on moving and developing and, reflecting the time in which they happen. Certainly a lot has happened since the 1915 World's Fair. And, I appreciate Maggie's overview and Yongjian sharing some of his experiences. I'd like to take a few moments to show some of the work that we've been up to lately, particularly with the World's Fair that concluded just a few months ago, the Expo 2020 Dubai. It was postponed a year because of the pandemic. And I'll take a moment to acknowledge and honor my colleague, Ethan Stanton, who was one of our coordinators on the project. And he lived and breathed pretty much every bit of that U.S. participation at that World's Fair over the course of a couple of years. So Ethan, thank you for your work that helped the United States realize a pavilion. I'm going to share my screen if I can and talk a little bit about our successful pavilion in Dubai. I know that Cesar Corona, who is with us here as a participant in this webinar, was able to visit the World's Fair. I hope some others on the journey on the webinar were able to be with us. But this is a picture of our who was able to be with us. So our pavilion, a lot of people ask, what is a pavilion? In our case, it was a 40,000 square foot building with about 23,000 square feet of exhibition space. We welcomed 1.2 million people over the course of a 6-month experience. We had 8 exhibits. The building was open 12 hours a day for 183 days. And we had a mixture of interactive and technology-driven experiences, but we also had some unique, really one-of-a-kind moments. For example, for the first time in history, we had Thomas Jefferson's Quran was allowed to leave the U.S. Capitol complex. We had a piece of a moon rock, which the kids loved, and kids of all ages, and then as well a piece of a Martian meteorite. And so that really helped capture people's imaginations. The Thomas Jefferson Quran we used to help illustrate our country's history of religious inclusion and tolerance. One of the key points, as Maggie mentioned, is our Youth Ambassador Program. We ran a really rigorous selection process and really rigorous recruitment process this year with the goal of fielding the most diverse group of youth ambassadors in the history of U.S. pavilions at World's Fairs. We worked through our Department of State diplomats and residents that are colleges and universities across the country. We reached out to underrepresented populations. We had a specific outreach to some Hispanic foreign affairs organizations, some historically Black college and university processes, and hey, also recognizing you have to go to where people are. Global Ties US and with our friends at Global Ties San Francisco also advertised on Instagram because that's the way to get people and to get eyeballs. So we ended up fielding 75 youth ambassadors from 37 US states and the District of Columbia. This is a picture of the group just before they launched. We were able to bring them to Washington, D.C. For an orientation program. And they just did a fantastic job really connecting with people. And I have had many, many officials from other countries sit down and tell me that the best thing that the U.S. has done is the Youth Ambassador Program. And, we look to continue to evolve and sustain that program and make it even stronger as we go through, continuing to strengthen the program. And we look to Osaka and other future World's Fairs. California connection, because everything is local. We had 10 youth ambassadors from California, along with California connections, and they did a terrific job. You can see you have this slide that's in the materials that's been sent ahead. We tried to cover all of the United States. It's tough, but I can say that between our youth ambassador and our cultural performer program, we had representation from all 50 U.S. states, which is a goal my team set for ourselves, that between the youth ambassadors and cultural performers, every U.S. state would have someone present, would be represented. So we were pleased with that, getting that goal. Oops. Our cultural performer program, we entertained 58,000 people in about 189 different events, 189 performances. We had speakers. We had bands, we had Disney princesses, we had it all. We had the Harlem Globetrotters, we had culinary diplomacy. Really what we're trying to showcase is from the Atlantic to the Pacific, the Caribbean up to the northern border, that the US is a diverse place. There's so much more than you see on social media or mainstream media. What we have here is a picture of the University of, that's the Tulane University marching band. We also have the University of Minnesota marching band. Other California connections, we had Access Dance, we had Illuminate, we had scholars from the University of Southern California, Nick Cull and Mina Chow. We had Yvonne Cagle. We featured these magnificent 30-foot photos of US national parks taken by a Vietnamese American photographer from California, QT Luong, and as I mentioned, the Harlem Globetrotters earlier. We're all about promoting American prosperity. Our business program was robust. We had 175 events, partnered really closely with the US-UAE Business Council, and we were able to host trade delegations. We had 6. We had California, Florida, Michigan, Minnesota, Texas, Virginia. We would have liked to have had more, but the pandemic really clipped a lot of wings during the course of the year, during the course of the 6 months that the event was running. But seeing is believing. So I'd like to show a little video about our pavilion.
Hi, I'm Bob Clark. I'm here to welcome you to the U.S. Pavilion. Come and see the American dream.
The USA Pavilion at Expo 2020 Dubai welcomed over 1.5 million visitors. For those 6 months, guests from around the world experienced our theme of life, liberty, and the pursuit of the future, which celebrated the American people, ideas, and contributions that have changed and improved lives in the United States and around the world. Expo 2020 Dubai was one of the largest events of its kind ever to be held in the Middle East. The USA Pavilion provided a unique platform to share American culture, promote mutual understanding, engage global audiences, and support international business opportunities.
The United States greatly appreciates the UAE's commitment to a successful, inclusive, safe, and healthy expo for everyone.
The USA Pavilion at Expo 2020 allowed us to share our American history, to promote mutual understanding, and to highlight our commitment to a rules-based international system. Thank you for joining us on our World's Fair journey. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of the future.
That was a little recap of our experience in Dubai, very much about promoting American prosperity, promoting American values, telling America's story, supporting our friends and allies, and frankly, having some fun while we were at it too, and really showcasing the best of America. I wanted to say that as well, that we now need to look to the future. One of our active projects now is to bring the World's Fair back to the US. We've got a campaign, it's been endorsed by President Biden. We are competing with 4 other countries to secure the rights to host Expo 2027. It's a year-long campaign. We've got another year left. We'll know in the summer of next year. We're competing against Argentina, Thailand, Spain, and Serbia. But we're confident that with the full force of our U.S. State Department and our friends, that we'll bring the World's Fair back to Minnesota. We're also getting ready, actively working on preparing for a U.S. Pavilion at Expo 2025 in Osaka. We're super important. This will be a big event in Asia. It's important for us to be present as a country, and work to continue to sustain the ties that bind people and countries. Overall, we expect about 28 million visitors will be on the grounds, and we will get several million of those at the United States Pavilion. With that, I'd like to say that you can follow us on social media channels and reach out to us through the web. But it's our honor to serve. It's our honor to work with great organizations like Global Ties to help bring the world closer together and serve the American people and help people understand who we are as a country when we have our pavilions overseas, and hopefully welcome the world in 2027 to Minnesota. So with that, I'll hand it back to Yongjian and Maggie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jim. Love that video. That was great. At this time, we are going to turn to open Q&A. And I would just encourage everybody, if you would like to participate, please come on camera. And if you have any issues turning your camera on, just let me know and I'll fix that right away. Oh, awesome, it worked. Hi Morgan, hi Phyllis. We have some of our wonderful home hospitality hosts joining us here today. We're going to get started. I just wanted to kind of mention a few details first to kind of set the scene as to who's in the room here. To get us started, I wanted to say out of all those who registered, 29.6% said that they are highly knowledgeable of international expos, fully and enthusiastically knowledgeable. 59.3% said have medium knowledge of World Expos, have heard of World Fairs before, but don't know much about US participation in them. And then 11% said low knowledge, never heard of them before. And I think that total was like 2 people. So we have a lot of people here who are knowledgeable, interested. And with that, I would love to get the conversation started. I'm going to start with a question we had in the chat. Jalal, one of our IVLP participants, if you would like to unmute or come onto camera to ask your question, please feel free. Otherwise, I'd be happy to read your question aloud. But your first question, out of your 3, I mean, was directed to, I believe, Maggie. How long did the study take?
Yeah, so thanks so much for the question and the questions from everyone and the engagement and interest in the topic. We did the oral history interviews over about a 5-month period. They wrapped up this past January, and sort of it was an organic or snowball methodology where some youth ambassadors, because that's the site I was working on, would recommend others. We found people based on LinkedIn, and we try to really look to get as dynamic and diverse a group of people as possible, so that they would be kind of evenly split across the 4 international expos that I focused on, and come from different states, work in different fields, have different socio-cultural and racial backgrounds that would obviously affect their experiences and their perspectives. So that's sort of how we went about it. And Anna Kaplan, the other oral historian, got nominations from community-based organizations such as Global Ties San Francisco, and both of us also worked with the Expo unit, sort of looking through some of their records and institutional memory of people like Jim and Ethan, who knew folks and could recommend. So that's how long it took.
Thank you for that. Continuing on to another of Jalal's questions. We love the participation, trust me. The question was there any time that expos stopped due to war, for example? I will just say that Expo 2020 Dubai, thank you for the thumbs up, Jalal. Expo 2020 Dubai did get delayed or postponed. So I wonder, Jim, if you had some thoughts on, has there been a time that it hasn't been consistent or canceled or something like that?
Sure. Yes, the answer is, of course, World War II put a halt to World's Fairs. And I was looking through some records earlier as well. It looks like there was also a pause during World War I. But little known fact, Rome was supposed to host a World's Fair, I want to say in 1940 timeframe, and they built a venue. The war broke out. So that is an example. And then we really get into the modern, post-World War era with the World's Fair that was in Brussels, which was the first World's Fair after World War II.
Thank you for that. Phyllis, yes, please go ahead and unmute.
I don't
You're
believe
there.
all right, I'm not muted, am I?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted a little bit of history here. The 1915 International Pacific, Panama Pacific, whatever, the PPIE. Ansel Adams at that time was a young man, and his parents and he didn't like the school system. So for his whatever year that was, his father gave him a year-long ticket to the PPIE, and that was his whole schooling for that year. And if you read some of his remarks about that experience, it is just awesome. That at that fair they introduced, I think, the Singer sewing machine and the Ford, and they would make one a day. It was just a fascinating experience for that young man. There was also, because it was 1915, it was coming up on a world war, and they had First World War. They had their issues at that time with getting participants, and ultimately, some of the participants felt that their artwork, per se, would be safer in the U.S. expedition than it would be in their country if they were going to go to war. And it was similar in 1939 because they were hosting a expo or whatever it was on Treasure Island, and the war was coming on. And so they do tend to impact on international relations, shall we say. And that's all. Thanks.
Thank you for your addition to this conversation. That's awesome. We love hearing about the local San Francisco history. Thank you for that. I will pass it off to, excuse me, Zara, did you want to ask your question aloud?
Sure. So my question was, do you nominate participants for the expos, or can anyone apply?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't, it broke up for me.
Sure. My question was, do you nominate participants for the expos, or can anybody apply?
So are you referring to youth ambassadors or cities to host?
I suppose all of them.
Okay, right. So in terms of the United States and our process for countries, cities coming forward, there is a process, and newsflash, there's a law around it, and the Department of Commerce runs a selection process. They publish a notice in the Federal Register, and then from there, they have to meet certain evaluation. They run an evaluation program process, and then it has to meet certain standards. And if in this, and then the bid, if it meets those standards, will get presented to the Bureau of International Expositions, as we did with the Minnesota bid, and we'll enter into a campaign. So that's the process for a city in the U.S. For youth ambassadors, so the program varies from World's Fair to World's Fair, but our commitment is to be inclusive. Our commitment is to reflect the diversity of America, and we reach out to get people that are in that 18, 20 up to the mid 20s range, so that we can get out there and get people from coast to coast, northern border to the southern border.
Thanks for that, Jim. I will add to, with the work we did nominating, well, there you go. We nominated and recruited. So we nominated cultural acts that we felt demonstrated the cultural diversity of the United States and represented the Bay Area. And the nomination basically served as, now you still have to fill out the rest of it. But it's an application as well. So it's not like the IVLP, the International Visitor Leadership Program, that's just nomination based. There is an application for youth ambassadors and for cultural performers for the USA Pavilion. At least that was the case in Expo 2020 Dubai. I don't know if that's the standard, but I presume so. Okay, great. Thank you for that, Zara. Go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to add one thing about the cultural performance program that we didn't anticipate, and I think this is a really terrific little tidbit, is we had a lot of American young people. There were some bands in particular where we had to fast track their passport applications so that we could get them out there, because there were a couple dozen young people during the course of the event that had never traveled overseas. They didn't have passports. So we're like, wow, we were like, I really got jazzed that we were able to, through our pavilion program, provide an exchange opportunity for some Americans that had simply never traveled overseas.
That is interesting. It makes me remember I need to renew my passport. That's great. We have a couple other questions. I'm skipping around in order, so don't fret if I have not come to yours yet. I will come back to it. Diane Leiden asked about the frequency. Diane, did you want to ask your question aloud, or would you like me to read it for you?
Oh, you do a great job. You go ahead.
Sure. Okay. If you have any clarification points, feel free to jump in. But Diane asked about how often are expos held. For example, Olympics are every 4 years, respective of seasons. Can you talk about the bidding process? Does the US put in a bid every time? Is 2027 the next expo? There's a few things there. I will say that the US was not, well, Jim definitely can have the actual language here, but the US is recently back into membership at the BIE. I'll let you actually explain, Jim. Go ahead.
Hey, Ethan, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I will tackle the first part. So expos, large expos that are 6 months, happen every 5 years. So Dubai was supposed to be in 2020. Before that, the previous large expo was in 2015 in Milan, Italy. And the next one is in 2025, Osaka, Japan. So every 5 years, there's a 6-month expo. In between those big ones, there are 3-month specialized expos. Argentina was supposed to host in 2022, 2023, I believe. But due to COVID and some other issues, they had to bow out. So there is no in-between specialized expo between Dubai, and Osaka, although normally there would be. So the next expo is in Osaka in 2025, one of the big ones. And what the US is bidding on is to host a specialized 3-month expo in 2027, which is in between after Osaka and then before the next big one in 2030.
I think Ethan nailed it. Was there any other part of the
Yeah.
question that we need to?
Yeah,
get to?
just a follow-up, Ethan, then is, so for example, with the Olympics, there's several bids already in place and they know those places. So for example, you mentioned Japan, but then in 2030, is that decided? And so how often are those bids put out, and does the US bid every time?
I'll let Jim answer on whether or not the US bids every time, but for example, in 2030, countries have already submitted bids to host. So right now we're looking at Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, we're looking at South Korea, we're looking at Odessa, Ukraine, and then Rome, Italy. But Jim, if you want to talk more about kind of historically the bidding process and whether the
Sure.
US submits bids on a routine basis.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and great question, Anne. Thank you. The United States was not a member of the Bureau of International Expositions from 2001 to 2017. And membership really is required to win. I mean, just the way the rules are written in the Convention of Paris, the rules of the BIE, you really have to be a member. I mean, there is a method, but it's just impractical that any non-member state would win the right to host a World's Fair, because it very much favors members of the BIE. That's fair. Okay, I'm okay with that. So the United States did not compete to host a World's Fair from, I want to say, like somewhere in the area of like 1984 until the last bid. We were unsuccessful to bring for Expo 2023. Again, some Minnesotans had wanted to bring the World's Fair back to the US. So we were competing in 2017 to host a World's Fair. I hope I answered your question. I gave a lot of data that might have been confusing, but the bottom line is we didn't compete from basically 1984 until 2017, because for most of that period of time, we were not members.
Yeah, do you want to expand, Jim, on why the US wasn't a member for that period of time?
Yeah, there was, coming out of the Cold War, when we look at the congressional record, there was some questions about how the United States would participate in international relations in general. In 1992, funding for U.S. participation in World's Fairs, our participation was administered by the U.S. Information Agency. That funding was killed. I hate to use that term, but yeah, it was zeroed out by Congress. In 1992, the office that managed U.S. participations in World's Fairs within USIA closed. And there was no program office for U.S. participation in World's Fairs from 1992 until 2017. Now, during that same period of time, Diane, to answer your question very directly about membership in the BIE, there was a review of a lot of memberships that the U.S. held in international organizations. And we dropped out of many of them. The U.S. subsequently rejoined many, and this is a theory I have, but I don't have any records on it. But because there was no office, there was no program group or group of employees responsible for managing U.S. participation in World's Fairs, there was no one back at the ranch, if you will, at USIA or the State Department to suggest that we should continue our membership in the BIE. We stopped paying dues and pulled out in, I want to say, 2001. I hope that fully answered your question. Great.
That's great. That answers questions of my own too. So thank you for that, Jim. A couple more quick questions. We do have 1 minute left and want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we can't get to all of them. I can speed through a few real quick. Jalal asks, is it right to call participants in expos citizen diplomats? I'll jump in here. At least if you're talking about those like youth ambassadors that are at the USA Pavilion and guiding attendees around, I would argue yes, because just by nature of being a representative, give or take, of the United States, but just interacting with people, and you're just by nature of being in the presence of one another, and you're kind of unofficially representing the United States. But Jim, do you call them citizen diplomats in your terminologies? It's a very IVLP specific term.
No, I think to the extent that any of us are out there bringing the world together, helping to make the world a little more peaceful, a little more safe, a little more democratic, and helping to people understand us as a country, we're all citizen diplomats.
There you go. There you go. And that does already answer the previous question about, do you believe these person-to-person exchanges also make country ties closer? I would say it's a beginning to an answer there that I think we all believe that. I think we all truly do believe that and see. I don't know if any studies have been done about long-term impacts on country-to-country relations, but Jim, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I don't have any, empirical data.
Right.
There's certainly a body of knowledge that perhaps Maggie might want to speak to if you came across any of this. But there is a body of knowledge about how hosting an event can develop commercial ties between countries. There's a bit about how the design diplomacy, the built space could help people understand a country and a city. And I'd say that just history shows that when you look back to the 1800s and the 1900s, there's just a strong record of countries trying to put themselves on the global stage and using these tools. And even into the 21st century, the US was an upstart young country in the 1800s and the 1900s, and we used these tools. And now we see other countries coming onto the world stage and saying, hey, you know what? We're here and this is who we are. And then relations develop. Maggie, I may put you on the spot there, but I was wondering if there's anything you wanted to add.
No, I think that one of the impacts that was really meaningful and impressive to hear about, for example, youth ambassadors who served in Shanghai more than 10 years ago, they would talk about how they would read the headlines about US-China relations and the trade war, et cetera. And they would sort of talk about the nuance they understood between the people and the government and how they still had a lot of relationships, with people in China and how they had a more holistic perspective. And so that might not be the top line, but there's a lot of activity happening that's really positive that can be built upon. And a lot of the youth ambassadors that I spoke to ended up working at the Justice Department or the State Department. So these are people who are in positions of power and influence across different industries. So I would argue that it very much has it's a channel that is positive, that I think supports peace building, because it's a deeper perspective of the other, I guess you could say, and that there's a long-term engagement. People married people that they met at Expo, they studied abroad, like there were all sorts of things that happened as a result. So the impacts were pretty profound. Yeah. And I think the thing about the ambassadors, that was one of the greatest takeaways too, is just sort of having to refine those skills. Because I would stress that it wasn't just superficial level conversations only that were happening, but conversations about critical global issues, energy, food, et cetera. And that's something that people wanted to see embraced even more. Spaces for real cross-cultural, international dialogue around our greatest challenges, and having spaces, even if they're kind of contentious at time, those spaces that ultimately people are coming together to talk about them, that is a net positive in terms of creating a better path forward for us. So, yeah.
Maggie, I'll report that we had at least one engagement among our youth, one of our youth ambassadors in Dubai to a third country national. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
that tradition
Wow.
continues. That tradition continues.
That is awesome to hear. What a good note to end this on. Thank you all so very much. Appreciate everyone's time. If anyone else had any parting words, Jim, Maggie, Yongjin, thank you for your time here today. Yongjin, thank you for sharing your personal experience. Jim, thank you for your expertise. Maggie, thank you for your expertise. Love hearing about oral history. Very cool. Anything else from anybody? Yeah.
Thank you for doing what you guys do best at Global Ties, convening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bring
All
people
right.
together. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.